Welcome to AI Talks, and we talk openly with customers, partners, and colleagues about the modern digital organization and how AI, cloud, and enterprise software is helping make real-world difference to our high streets, our workplaces, our factories, and so much more. So settle down and let me hand over to our fantastic panel today.
Hello, it's Rebecca Calthorpe here, and welcome to another supply chain conversation. I'm joined today by Marcus Langford and John Hawkins from Coliance and Dirk Maney from IBM. Today we're discussing the journey to hybrid cloud and specifically around containerization. We'll cover the business and technical benefits that containers can achieve and how an organization can get started on their journey to cloud. Let's get started.
Good morning to you, Dirk, and good afternoon to you, John and Marcus. Thanks for joining us today on the AI Talks podcast. Quickly, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the topic we want to discuss today, I'm keen to know, as we've all been working from home since March, sum up in one word what your working from home, all of that has been like since March. John?
It's been quite normal, to be honest with you, because I work from home a lot. I miss going to London and meeting customers, actually, is what I missed.
So the one word for you, normal.
Sort of normal. Everyone else just joined me at home.
Lovely. Marcus?
Claustrophobic. I'm used to being out and about and travelling, and it's odd just being in one room all the time.
And Dirk, how about you?
I would say mine would be boundaries, that it's becoming too easy to work 12, 13-hour days, start early in the day, late. So you got to have some boundaries, know when to step away from the home office, take a walk, enjoy your family, do something, and not just sit in front of the computer for 12 or 13 hours.
Okay, thanks, Dirk. And now we're going to hand over to you to talk all things containers. So over to you guys.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for joining us today for a discussion around hybrid cloud, specifically around B2B or business to business. So John, that about 66% of companies are actively exploring cloud native development. And a related statistic is 75% of existing non-cloud applications will move to the cloud in the next 3 years. So my first question for you, John, is you work with many clients. Are these statistics consistent with what you're seeing and hearing from clients?
Without a shadow of a doubt, absolutely. I'm surprised that they're not already in the cloud more, to be honest with you. Most of our clients are trying out containerization, off-premise cloud, on-premise cloud, the likes of OpenStack, etc. What I usually find is they start out in a little bubble somewhere over in a development corner. The developers are keen to start something out, and then they grow it from there. So maybe what you're referring to is more of a management perspective almost, because I see it every day with every single developer knows this stuff.
That could very well be. People that respond to these types of surveys might be more executive or management level and not necessarily directly related to the people on the street. I'm curious, what do you think is driving some of the urgency that you're seeing, or that all this activity that you're seeing? What are some of the reasons that clients are telling you about why they're on this rapid push to move to the cloud?
I think it's actually split almost like I just said. There's a developer version, the techie version. They're going to this stuff because they recognize that they're able to group pieces of work together. They have the services concept, a microservice concept almost, whether that be at a large enterprise B2B ESB level, or whether that be literally a small application. And they recognize that they can keep all one set of functionality within one container, and they recognize the benefits that can give them in the long term. I think there's an awful lot of process around that they don't understand or don't get, and it takes them an awful long time to add that onto it. But I think that's where the developers come from. They see the benefits of versioning and utilitarianism of just having a small unit of work which they can manage and love and nurture over time, versus the management side of it. And I think they're getting more of it's the next evolution of a VM. They're getting the sort of the big Kubernetes side of things, the fact that they've got a bunch of infrastructure there potentially, a large amount of physical hardware, and how can they maximize use out of that? They're getting told that that's containerization. On top of that, they're also seeing the benefit, or hearing about the benefits, hopefully seeing some of the benefits of the same thing the developers are talking about, that unitization. I don't like using the word DevOps anymore, but that DevOps element that says, I've got a unit of work, I know it, I love it, I nurture it, I grow it, I version it, I can handle the releases an awful lot quicker than I did before. And that agility element, I think, really appeals to the management.
John or Marcus, I would invite your response to this. Do you feel that these activities are being driven more from a technology perspective, or is there real business value that clients are seeking that are accelerating some of these hybrid cloud initiatives?
I think from my perspective, we're seeing two elements. One is the business driver, which is the fear of being left behind with your competitors. Are you able to respond to market disruptions as quickly as your competitors are able to do? Are you able to implement new technologies as quick as your competitors? And that sort of fear of being left behind is saying, well, what are the technologies which are going to help me accelerate my journey? And things like containerizations and artificial intelligence are the key technologies which allow businesses to adopt new processes and new systems and new capabilities that they just haven't been able to do in the past, and do it at a speed that is beyond the imagination of what we had sort of 5-6 years ago even. That's what I see from that side. From a technology perspective, I think there's the things like the spike in this year in COVID. There's been a lot of things which have been delayed. So there's going to be a massive spike of people wanting to do activities next year and the year after. And they've got to figure out, well, how are they going to fit those into their very busy IT schedules? And if you take the normal sort of monolithic upgrade projects, for instance, and just did it business as usual, there's just not enough time in the world to be able to implement those sort of projects. And they have a key end date that they need to be implemented by. Otherwise, you've got security and compliance issues.
I think I'd add to what you said there, Marcus. If you look at the way that we've evolved from the last, goodness me, 25, 30 years, we started out computing in the 60s and 70s. It was all about getting some hardware up there. And then eventually you got to the application. Then you slowly started moving into the application set, which started to abstract some of the boring stuff, some of the logging and the tracing and the containerization side of JE containers. They started to be able to concentrate more on the actual application again. But still you were concerned about, I need to bring up an application server. It needs to be on this bit of hardware. VMs started to abstract that away again. So we started to concentrate more on the applications and less on the infrastructure. So we're going to have virtualized machines rather than physical machines. That allowed us to, again, manage those virtual machines with less pain. Containerization is another leap in that void. It's going into the sense that says, stop worrying about the infrastructure. Beauty of containers is that you can throw a container at a bunch of hardware and you don't have to manage that hardware anymore. Let Amazon handle it. Let IBM handle that. Let Google handle it. It doesn't matter anymore. Have your own on-premise guys that do the hardware, but just worry about your application. Concentrate on your code, on your business. And the containerization is all a part of that. It's just allowing you to say, I'm going to concentrate more on my little bit of application code, but it's not worrying so much about where it's physically deployed anymore. We're slowly abstracting all of that away. Containers are one thing, but it's all of those network and Istios and all those other sidecar type layers which really start to abstract you away from the physicalness of where it actually is. That really starts to help the managerial side of the company go, I've got an application team. They are concentrating most of their time on the application now, and they're concentrating less and less on the hardware, on the physical realities of actually how to deploy that stuff. That's what's really appealing to the manager, because that gives them agility, that gives them speed to market.
Great point, John. I think it would be helpful to our listeners if we really provide some clarity on the business benefits of containerization and hybrid cloud. From my experiences, it seems that sometimes we get involved in these conversations where we focus almost solely on technology, and we talk about containerization and Docker and Kubernetes, and maybe, as the saying goes, can't see the forest through the trees, that we lose sight of the big picture. So if I were to ask you, and Marcus hit on one of these around business value and responsiveness to the market, could you net out for our listeners what you see as the most significant business benefits if someone's putting together a business case and an ROI to embrace this type of technology move? What would you say were the 3 or 4 key business drivers that support a move to the cloud?
So I'll give you one specifically, which I see quite a bit. It's almost a technical answer, but actually it's not. It's really, really helping the business, is in terms of migration. Because our businesses are all about agility now, it's no good going to the business and saying, I'm going to give you that new feature in 2 years' time. It just doesn't work like that anymore, right? And nor can I really tell you nowadays, I'm going to give you that function in 6 months' time. Usually that's still too long nowadays, right? For a lot of businesses that I work with, they want it in a couple of weeks' time or a month's time. They're looking at the Amazons of the world who are getting it out in hours' time. So they're trying to catch up and give constant functionality and new function and keep up with the Joneses and get that application out there, or else their business is dead because they've lost to the guy who can do it. So at that point, you go, well, how do containers help me? What is this technology helping my business agility that I'm looking for? And one of the key things that we find is just simply the ability, and I say simply, it's a very hard thing to do, but the ability just to version and back out changes. The ability to say, I have a container here, which is a version 0.11, and I've got a container here, which is a version 0.12. Let's just go spin up 0.12 and see what happens. I think it'll be okay. Everything tells me it's going to be okay. But you know what? I've got the potential now just to go spin it up, put some data through it, see what happens. If all okay, I'll upgrade every other container into 0.12. Otherwise, I'm going to stick with 0.11 and figure out what went wrong with 0.12. That gives them agility and time to market and the ability to add functionality as and when they want. It doesn't have to be perfect at that point. They don't have to have gone through a massive testing regime on the 0.12 version. They can give as good as, we're pretty damn certain this is going to work. We don't have to go through a 2-month test cycle because we can just try it. And if it doesn't work, we can back it out. We haven't lost anything. That's a massive, massive win for a business that needs to be agile.
I'd say that gives you as the business owner, you're not spending large amounts of money on your plumbing and your sewage works and all the things like that. You're actually spending your money on the nice things and putting the nice furniture in your house and making your place look good for your customers and things like that. That's where you can spend more money on that instead of having to keep the underlying infrastructure of your building going. And you're just releasing what you're spending on the infrastructure and giving it out to what is actually going to make you an attractive house to buy or an attractive business to deal with. Different way of saying what John's sort of talking about.
I wanted to build on something I believe, John, you and both of you actually have talked about as far as maintaining sometimes potentially a rather complex environment. So let's talk about a real example. So I believe that many listeners to today's podcast will be existing Sterling customers. They're using some of our B2B collaboration solutions. Many of them will be going through upgrade processes over the next year to get to the latest versions and versions that may be going out of support. So if you look at that type of scenario and look at a future view of how that would be different in a containerized world, can you put into real terms some of the cost savings and simplification and more rapid response that a client would derive from having a containerized version rather than dealing with the traditional installed on-premises software? Compare and contrast what they might be used to today to versus what it might look like a year from now when they make that journey to the cloud.
I've seen some projects 18 months ago, we may have quoted a year end-to-end delivery schedule on. And we're now sort of looking at those being, and this is from standing start of having the tool not available to it being in production, where it might have taken a year to do with that exercise. We can do that in sort of a 3 months. So with that cost saving that you're just introducing straight away to customers is massive. And there's John's, as you start rolling that out further, that starts to accelerate, because what you're doing is you're taking the monolithic item, which would have taken a year, it gets down to sort of 3 months, that down into sort of microservices, and you're doing constant changes. And as you say, the Amazons and the people of this world talk in days introducing new functionality. And that's just the massive benefit that brings to the front end business of being able to deliver real business benefits to them, not having all that massive overhead of infrastructure, the cost of having to maintain that in the background.
What we're actually talking about here is complexity. Every business I've ever worked for, their biggest issue is just the sheer damn complexity of the code and the applications they've got. And they can't keep track of most of it. So what containers and containerization helps you to do is start to, as we tried to do for years, let's be quite clear, it's just another way of doing it, break down those applications into smaller pieces that you can manage. And once you've started to break things down into smaller chunks, you start to loosen those tight bonds between them. 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, you'd have had a huge enterprise service bus with goodness knows how many hundreds of applications on it and integrations on it. You'd have probably had one god person at the top of the organization who might just have had a clue how all those different integrations interacted. But push come to shove, when you added new functionality into one of those integrations, you might well have had to test other integrations around it because you weren't completely convinced, or you didn't actually know exactly where each of them interacted. By starting to break things down into containers, you can start to break down function and describe functions in terms of smaller units. And that helps you to loosen the bonds between those different applications. That means for the business people and the managers listening, that you can just test that piece of function because you know clearly the bounds between that and the other integrations in applications that you've got going on. That's the reality that we're trying to get to with containers. It's just loosening those bonds and understanding of the interfaces that a container has and the application that's running in that container. Again, versioning, etc., comes into that, but testing is a huge element of that. If you can reduce your testing time and have a strong confidence that you're not breaking something else, that's a massive win for a lot of businesses.
John, I'd like to build on something that you said based on some of the interactions I've had with clients. I think some of them are wrestling with the approach that they want to take, whether they want to, they're all on board with the idea of containers and they get the benefit of that. I think the next level of discussion, however, becomes, do I want to do it myself and, roll my own and create my own containers, take software, repackage it, and deploy my own container management platform, or do I want to leverage something such as IBM offers around certified containers that are purpose-built and certified to take full advantage of a solution like Red Hat OpenShift. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that, maybe provide some insight to our listeners on, some considerations on doing it yourself versus relying on certified container solutions.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. That's fair. And you're getting into the viper's nest, basically. This is where it all starts, right? This is where the bleeding edge of technology is taking us. So it's one thing to have a container. That is a tiny part of the problem. It's the management of that container. It's the management of all the network and connections and everything else. We were talking about removing of infrastructure. Well, that has to be simplified somehow. That conversation has to be simplified. And that's where the likes of OpenShift help you. They start to abstract those layers away for you. So you don't have to start hand cranking network connections and database connections and disk connections and memory connections. And what bit of hardware is that container running on today? And do I need to put it over there? What's the workload balancing algorithm that I'm going to use this hour? All of that stuff is really, really hard. And that's absolutely the point of the OpenShifts of the world. They're abstracting that really complex stuff away from you. Again, to get back to what I said before, so you can concentrate on your application and not worry about the infrastructure. Now, you can go get a container and you can go and try and run it on a VM or on a bit of hardware, and you can go have some fun. That's one container. The point is the containerization isn't about one container. It's about hundreds and thousands of containers. That's the point, because we're breaking down function into smaller and smaller reusable units. That's when you need something that adds that abstraction layer in there for you, away from the hardware, away from the CPUs and the RAMs and the load balancing algorithms and all that stuff. That's what the OpenShifts are needed for. There's no, oh gosh, I might need it. You need that stuff, period. And that's why the likes of IBM are investing huge amounts of money and effort into getting that right for you. It's absolutely essential, and it will continue to be essential, absolutely, in the foreseeable future.
As we come to a close on our conversation today, I have a feeling that some of our listeners might be feeling a bit overwhelmed and they're not quite sure what the next logical step should be. I wonder if both of you could end our conversation today and share some words of advice where a client should begin that hybrid cloud journey. What are some immediate next steps they can do to deliver on this idea of hybrid cloud?
The next steps, I think, is we found very useful to sort of doing with customers. We've been doing some design thinking about how you make those decisions. It's been a very useful tool that we've worked with customers, where they can take their real business issues and start to say, okay, how do we make those steps and how do we involve that in there? It's something that's been around for a long time, but it really, really helps accelerate the process internally of making sure you get all the right parties together. And if you get that right at the beginning and do that design thinking piece, then everything else follows, and people get why. If the business managers get why we're talking about the technology and the containerization and the management of those, because they in the conversations they can see that the problem they've been wrestling with shortage of supply of X or Y can be delivered that much quicker to them if we adopt this approach, and that's worked really, really well for us. So in our case, we tend to start these days with those design thinking workshops and work through that.
I'm going to say, I expect your guys are already doing it. You might not know about it. I come back to what I started off with. They're probably already playing around with containers. Now, what they might not be doing is going into the OpenStack world. That's more an enterprise level. So I'd probably say, it's the same old thing, right? Find a project, find something small, find some new functionality maybe that you want, rather than trying to pull apart something else, and say, right, we're going to make this piece of fun. We're going to make this application containerized, maybe 2 or 3 containers. Let's build it up. Let's start with a really simple system. Let's dedicate one machine to it rather than a whole blooming AWS farm or something like that. And just try something small. At the moment, there is no right or wrong way to do it. And I've had lots of conversations with customers about this, and we all agree, basically, there is no book here. There's no prescription that we can give you, I'm afraid. And that's sort of the hard bit. It's bleeding edge, but every single bit of blood is worth it at the moment. So just get going in a small way. Your developers will relish it. I've not found a developer who doesn't love containers and doesn't love mucking around with these things. Let them have fun, I think.
I like both of your ideas. I think design thinking is absolutely a good first step. And John, your idea, suggestion around finding a project, and you're right, there probably already are some projects underway. Get some successes, get some experience under your belt. I agree completely with those. And really the last one I would add is to those listeners is get some help. There is expertise from the IBM team and from our business partners, such as Coliance, that are ready to help you on this journey. So don't be shy about bringing in some experts to help you plan out that journey. With that, I believe our time has concluded for today. I want to thank both John and Marcus for joining us today, and we look forward to chatting with you on a future discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dirk. That is going to wrap up today's conversation. So thanks to you, John, Marcus and Dirk, for joining me today. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in to our AI Talks podcast. If you would like to hear more, or if you have any questions about what we've discussed today, there is a link to my LinkedIn profile in the description below, so please get in touch. Enjoy the rest of your day and speak with you all soon.